Faith-Forward Media, this is Healthcare Musings. I'm Dr. Hashem Hasabala. Welcome, everybody, to Healthcare Musings. Happy to have you with me. I am delighted to have Dr. Jeff Willis with me on the show. Let's give you an idea of who he is. Dr. Willis is an emergency medicine physician who practiced for 20 years before hanging up his stethoscope in 2023 for a full-time career in medical malpractice consulting. He trained at Carolinas Medical Center in Charlotte, North Carolina. He was medical director of a level 1 trauma center. He owned and managed an ED staffing group, and he finished his clinical career working in a rural critical access hospital. Now he owns On-Call Medical Legal Consulting, providing pre-litigation case analysis and expert witness search for medical malpractice attorneys. And Jeff also recently launched Expert Retainer, a new platform that directly connects medical experts with attorneys for medical malpractice and personal injury cases. I will link his website and Expert Retainer in the show notes for those who are interested. So welcome, Dr. Willis.
Hey, thanks. How are you doing this morning?
Good. Thanks so much for making time. I know you're super busy. So we were introduced through a mutual friend who was, in my mind, one of the best emergency medicine physicians I've ever worked with. Very good, very smart, conscientious, really cared. I mean, I loved working with him. He would bring me patients to the ICU on a silver platter with a bow tied, and everything was done. I loved working with him, and it was really very sad for our field that he left. I understand why. He got burned out. He's much more happy, or he's much happier, I should say now. We're not happy that he's no longer a clinical physician. At the same time, he introduced us, and I wanted just to get your story about, I've been practicing, it'll be 20 years this July as well. So kind of your journey from emergency medicine, out of emergency medicine.
Yeah, you bet. So, the story you tell about our mutual friend is, I mean, it's not an uncommon one, right? I mean, those that tend to put the most into their work and tend to devote themselves to the profession and doing their profession and practicing medicine to the best of their ability all the time. They're usually also involved in administration and extra committees and that sort of thing. And so it does lead to, people call it burnout. I don't love that word, really. It sort of gives the impression that physicians have some sort of a finite amount of fuel and eventually you're burned out and you have nothing left. But really, it's more of just, for me, it was more of just a transition on to the next thing, So like you said, I trained at Carolinas. I went initially to a level 2 trauma center, worked for a couple of years, got into a really bad situation with an ED group that was blowing up, which, right out of residency, you don't really recognize
Right.
the politics that are happening, and next thing you know, it's kind of crumbled out from under your feet. And so I landed in Southwest Missouri at a level 1 trauma center, where I eventually became medical director, and I was medical director there for several years. 95,000 visit, big monstrosity. Got my master's of healthcare administration while I was there, and kind of saw how the sausage was made a lot. Did a lot of administrative duties and a lot of committees and all that sort of thing, and enjoyed it. But eventually got to a point where I realized that it can be difficult to make a difference in a big healthcare system. It was a big multi-hospital system, and so all you could really do was protect your docs and try and give them the best practice environment possible, which is great. But boy, it zaps your energy quite a bit. So
Yeah.
and so I left that, started a ED staffing group where we staffed several small hospitals in the region. Did that up until kind of right when kind of COVID started a little bit, and that's when hospitals really sort of shut down and stopped changing ED groups and thinking about anything other than survival mode. And so I was also working in a rural critical access hospital, which was something I'd never done. And I spent 5 years there and absolutely loved it. But eventually realized that I felt like I'd done just about all I could do in clinical medicine. And it wasn't that I didn't like the medicine itself or that I was necessarily burned out and didn't have energy. I needed to put my energy somewhere else. And so I stumbled on medical legal consulting and started doing a little bit of it on the side. Did it for about 6 months until I realized, this could be a business. I could do this full time, but to be able to do it full time, I'm not also going to be able to work 24-hour shifts in my critical access hospital.
Right.
Where I then have 24 to 48 hours of physical and mental recovery before I could really sit down and do anything meaningful. And I just sort of jumped out without a parachute. Didn't really have an income at this point. I was doing some consulting on the side, but I said if I'm going to do this, I need to do it full time. And I set some money aside in an account, paid myself a certain amount each month out of my savings, and spent the last 2 years building a business. And that's where I am now. So I'm doing full-time medical legal consulting, and like you mentioned in the intro, my primary work is in pre-litigation consulting. So primarily, your listeners probably won't love this, but primarily working for plaintiff attorneys, doing
Mm,
pre-litigation case analysis.
we're going to talk about that.
We can talk about that in more detail. And then for cases that do move forward, I help them find experts. Experts are they're out there. There's a lot of them doing the work, but they're not always easy to find. And so my clients pay me to help them go look for the right experts for particular cases, whether that be plaintiff or defense. I do that for both sides. And then, as you also mentioned, I just started a new platform called Expert Retainer, which is a completely 100% free for experts, completely anonymous platform where experts are able to have a profile that is not public facing, but attorneys can still submit cases and experts have access to cases through that. So that was actually just launched a few weeks ago. So yeah, I've been busy, super happy. I couldn't be happier. I miss clinical medicine a little bit, but honestly, my excitement about waking up every day and getting to work is more than it's been in years. So I'm very happy. I understand what you are saying when you say it's sad to lose good clinicians and you don't want them leaving the bedside, but that's okay. They can still make a difference in healthcare. They can still make a difference and improve healthcare for the better, not necessarily being at the bedside. At least that's what I tell myself. So
There's a lot to unpack there. So the first thing
yeah,
that
yeah.
really intrigued me was you don't like the term burnout. Wow, I really like that. Explain that more for the audience. Kind of unpack that for us.
Yeah, so it started when a lot of hospital administrator types were hiring, burnout consultants, right? Like,
Hmm.
and it places the blame and it places the deficiency on the physicians or providers or the people working in the hospital. Like, well, if they could just figure out a better way to manage themselves or manage the stress, they wouldn't lose all their energy. They wouldn't lose their flame. It's them that's the problem, not necessarily the system that's the problem. So that's how the concept in my mind of burnout, it started to leave a bad taste in my mouth. And I thought about it a little bit more. And then I thought, burnout means you're burned out, your fuel is gone, right? Like there's no fire left, there's nothing left to burn, and you're now useless. And that's just not true. I mean, yes, you know a lot about critical care medicine, right? You're a brilliant clinician, but
Thank you.
you have learned a lot more skills in your career than just how to take care of sick patients. You've learned how to communicate with people. You've learned conflict resolution. You've learned stress management. You've learned how to navigate through politics of a hospital. You've learned how to be a leader. You've learned how to handle yourself in situations that you've never been in before, but you have to pretend like you know what you're doing just so everyone around you stays calm. These are all life skills that you have learned. You're not burned out. You have a ton of fuel left, but maybe some people need to use those skills and use that energy and use that fuel for a different purpose, not necessarily just at the bedside, not necessarily just in healthcare, but there's a lot of opportunities out there for people. And so the more I thought about it, the more I'm like, man, I don't like that term burnout at all.
I like it. I like that a lot. That I've never thought of it that way. I think some of that the term I think some of burnout is a mismatch of expectations. Like you come out thinking one thing and the reality is another, and so
Sure. Yeah.
that continual disappointment leads to burnout, quote unquote. Now I'm going to use it in quotes. Like it just this is not what I thought it was, and I think some of that is on the part of training programs, and I had a whole podcast episode with Dr. Adam Seafiu from the University of Chicago about how they don't make them like they used to, and the training is setting up a lot of people, in my opinion, for failure
Absolutely. Yep.
because it's just the work hasn't changed, but the training has. You know, it's just like a nuclear submarine, right? It's a nuclear submarine. So I can't dumb down the training, because if you do it wrong, you have nuclear catastrophe, right? So life and death in the ICU. I don't have time for your feelings when someone's dying right in front of my face, and that's not how it was when you were in training. Well, I don't care. I have to handle that patient right this second, right?
Right, absolutely.
So
Yeah.
yeah, so I think part of that, but I really love the fact that we do have fuel. It's not us that's the problem. It's the system that disillusions you. Would that be a fair statement?
I think so. And also, and what I found too was that you're so busy and you're so in the moment with all of your work that you never have the opportunity to explore other possibilities of things you could be doing with your skills. You never have that freedom or permission from yourself to go out and even think, even daydream about other opportunities. And that's one of the reasons I really encourage people who are feeling, burned out, or whatever phrase you want to use, to treat the exploration almost like a job for a while. Give yourself permission to go out and look at other opportunities, see what's out there, see what other people outside of not just your facility, but outside of medicine in general are doing. And then you'll know if there's something out there that could light that fire again for you. And maybe not. Maybe taking that time away confirms, no, I really want to be the best clinician I can. So what do I need to do to make sure I maintain the fuel? But you have to be very intentional about it. I used to hate the concept of a coach, right? It always seemed very, very shystery to me, but I hired one. And he has become one of my best friends, one of my best guides in life, because he gave me the opportunity and the permission to look and think about other things. And so I highly encourage anybody to spend the resources to find the right person for you to help guide you through that, who's objective, who has seen it before, knows how to help you walk through that process to see if there's a change that's necessary for you. And if there is, great. And if there's not, awesome, awesome as well. At least you've explored that. You can check it off the list and then refocus on what you need to refocus on.
That's wonderful. Why can't you do both? I mean, for me, I love being at the bedside. That's what I've always wanted to do in my entire life. This stuff like this, however, is intriguing, right? Medical legal consulting is intriguing. It's kind of an interesting thing that you can use your skills. Why can't you do both?
You absolutely can. You absolutely can. Now, for me, the way I wanted to do it required a full-time commitment because I wasn't simply doing expert witness work and doing, 5 to 10 cases a year. My work is a full-time job and being readily accessible for attorneys to call for meetings 5 days a week, 8 to 5. Well, since I work coast to coast, it's sort of 6 to 6. But so that's why for me it required that. It certainly doesn't. There are so many side gigs and side hustles and other things that can re-energize you and work full-time clinically and do them, or even back off 10 or 15, 20%, and then add something in that stimulates you intellectually, is altruistic, and sometimes can make you as much or more money than what you're making at the bedside, depending on what your situation is.
Oh wow. Well, that's actually good to know. So, all right. Uh, One thing about medical legal consulting that always made me feel uncomfortable, and I have been the subject of litigation in the
Sure.
past, as most doctors
Most of us have. Yep.
will be, yeah, is the plaintiff attorney, the plaintiff expert, some doctor somewhere who has no idea, is not in my field, doesn't know what happened, doesn't see what I saw, and then comes and tells me I did something wrong. I'll never forget the first time I was served with papers. My now 24-year-old daughter, who's a first-year medical student, was in my arms. I was holding her. She was a baby. And someone had knocked at the door and handed me, "Are you Dr. Hasabala?" "Yes." "Here you go. What is this?" "Have a nice day." Walked away. I opened up
No.
and it was a wrongful death suit. And I read the suit, and it made me feel like a murderer. Like they made me out. I was an intern at the time, like
Oh
literally
gosh.
1 month out of medical school. And they made me seem like a murderer. And it was very difficult. And some experts somewhere said didn't follow the standard of care, and so on and so forth. And the case went to the Illinois Supreme Court, and we were acquitted by a jury. I was dismissed with the case was ended up in an acquittal, and they appealed all the way to the Illinois Supreme Court, and the acquittal was upheld. That that
That's pretty rare. That's pretty rare for it to go that far.
yeah, well, I don't know what they just the plaintiff did not like the result, and we went all the and I testified at trial, and that experience was so painful. Like I said, this was my daughter's 24 now. That was 23 years ago, right? I mean, it was a long time, and I remember it like it was yesterday.
Yep.
That there's a whole podcast about medical litigation talking about how physicians are suicidal and everything. It's a very
Yeah,
difficult.
her podcast is wonderful.
Yeah, yeah. So like it's hard for me to do that to another physician. Talk to me about that.
Absolutely. So let's take a step back first and separate two different types of consulting. So first, let's talk about what a typical expert witness does. So a testifying expert. A testifying expert is retained by a plaintiff attorney or a defense attorney to review the materials and provide an opinion on whether or not the standard of care was met and or whether the damages that are alleged were caused by a breach in that standard of care. So that is what a testifying expert does. Then there are consultants, which is me, and there are not too many of us that do this particular work full time, that are behind the scenes consultants, and before cases are even filed, do pre-litigation consulting to help plaintiff attorneys decide whether or not a case should move forward. So there's two separate types of consultants. Now, your testifying experts, for most good plaintiff attorneys and ethical plaintiff attorneys, they will frequently retain those experts, and if the expert says there's no case, they drop it and they move on. Only if the testifying expert says, yes, there was a breach in standard of care, there are damages, and there's a causation link between those two. So let's start with that as a base. Let's also take one more step back and demystify the, or not demystify, it's not the word I want to look for, but I'm trying to say a fancy word, but I don't have one in my head. Everybody thinks there's a lot of frivolous lawsuits, right? They'll sue you for anything. They'll sue you for anything.
Yeah.
Anytime you're sued, that's how you feel, right? Like I was named in a suit twice because I'm an ER physician. We get named all the time because we're at some point in the life cycle of that care, we touch the patient, right? I was
Mhm.
dismissed from both cases and never, made it to anything, but still that same feeling that you had, right? It just boils in your blood. For every 100 cases that are brought to a plaintiff attorney, so a patient or family member brings a potential medical malpractice case to a plaintiff attorney, for every 100 of those cases, they outright, just based on the first conversation, say no thank you to 90 of them.
Really?
Yep. 10 of them, they say, okay, we'll look into it. Of those 10, one case is filed. And that is consistent across plaintiff attorneys, left coast to right coast. So essentially 1% of cases that are brought to them, do they actually end up filing? And the reason for that is because, as I mentioned, you have to have a breach in the standard of care, which is defined as what would a similarly trained provider do given a similar set of circumstances and similar clinical scenario. So you have to have a breach in standard of care. You have to have damages that are significant enough for the plaintiff attorney to use their resources. And there has to be a causation link between those, right? So I don't want to get into the weeds, but say someone didn't diagnose cancer on an x-ray and 2 weeks later they were diagnosed with lung cancer and died, right? So yes, they missed the cancer on the x-ray, and yes, the patient died, but they didn't die because of that 2-week delay. right? So
Right.
that would never be a case. That would never be filed. There's no plaintiff attorney that would file that. So you have to have all of those criteria. Also bear in mind that plaintiff attorneys, everything that they do is on contingency. So if they don't win the case, if they don't have a settlement, or if they don't have a win at trial and get a significant amount back, everything that they have spent pursuing that case is 100% on them. They lose everything. If they have a settlement or if they win a case, generally they take somewhere between 30 to 40, sometimes up to 50% of the settlement for themselves. So it's extremely expensive for them to try a case and lose. It is almost impossible to get out of a medical malpractice case without a plaintiff attorney spending between $100,000 and $200,000.
Is that
Just,
right?
yeah, just because of experts, depositions, staff, like all the stuff that goes into it over the course of 1 to 2 years, it's $100,000 to $200,000. So
Mhm.
yes, it can feel like there's a lot of frivolous suits. Yes, it can feel like sometimes there's ridiculous cases that shouldn't be won. And yes, they do exist. That said, for the most part, good plaintiff attorneys, if they're pursuing a case, they genuinely feel like something was done wrong and that they're supporting their client. So if you're on the receiving end of it, it never feels that way. 100% understand. So all of that as a background, let's talk about being an expert witness and how can you reconcile being an expert witness and saying that another colleague, maybe in 5 states over, did something wrong. Like how can you reconcile that?
Yeah. Before we get into that, let me
Yep.
stop there. And the contingency, I always thought that that was an incentive for a plaintiff attorney just to take any case. Do you think if we make it a flat fee that they have to charge, that they can't take a contingency of the settlement, will that increase the number of cases, or is the contingency actually mitigating the number of cases that come through because there's such a huge risk on the plaintiff?
Well, it's absolutely mitigating. So as you know, when I'm doing even they pay me to look at cases, and if I tell them, hey, this is a really iffy case, I would probably shy away from it. 100% of the time, they never press me. They just say, sounds good. We want none of it. We're done. Because they do not want cases that they do not feel are slam dunks. It is way too risky because they're spending $100,000 to $200,000, not to mention an unbelievable amount of time that goes into preparing for these cases. So
Mhm.
they don't want anything that they don't feel super solid about. So that is why, taking it to that next level, as a plaintiff expert witness, yes, there are shills, there are bad experts that will say anything for money. Yes, that exists.
I
That
mean, the
exists
one
on
for my
both.
case was like a neurologist, I think, or a retired pathologist or something at some university. Who are you to know what happened or can testify to the standard of care in that case? I didn't mean to interrupt you, but that like
No, no,
that
no,
is
absolutely, no, absolutely, and that should not happen. Most states, if you were talking about the standard of care, now anybody can testify on causation, but for standard of care, most states have relatively stringent and specific criteria on who can opine on standard of care. So, like in Missouri, it needs to be the same board specialization practicing in like a similar clinical setting. In Tennessee, it has to be a physician that is licensed in Tennessee or a state that is contiguous with Tennessee, which is one of the weirdest rules ever because what does that mean? But there are specific rules. And if you have a plaintiff attorney that is getting some shill to say anything that they want, generally they are going to lose that case, as was the situation in yours, right? They
right.
lost. The expert wasn't credible, and you can also the judge, if an expert doesn't qualify for certain challenges, they call them like Daubert challenges, but their testimony can be excluded because they're not qualified to opine on the case. Um, so circling back again, if you are a solid testifying expert witness, I wouldn't say it's your duty to opine for both because you can do whatever the heck you want, right? But you should look at every case completely objectively. And if there was an absolute breach in the standard of care, you should be willing to say that. If for nothing else, even if it makes you sick to your stomach to do that to somebody, to see that they made a huge mistake, a willful bad mistake, even if it makes you sick to your stomach to do that, you need to maintain your credibility, because if you're a testifying expert that will only testify for the defense, that'll work for a while. Over time, that starts coming up in depositions, that starts coming up in trial. You know, hey doctor, how long have you been doing this work? I've been doing it for 6 years. Great. How many cases have you testified for the defense? 47. How many times have you testified for the plaintiff? 0. Right? Your credibility is gone. So you lose your ability to defend doctors when they clearly didn't breach the standard of care and when clearly there wasn't malpractice. So if for nothing else, that's a solid reason to at least consider doing plaintiff work.
Plaintiff work. Okay. Yeah, that makes sense. Someone else told me that same thing, is that they can impugn your credibility if you're only for the defense. The issue is we are held to a standard of perfection that is unfair. Sometimes things are missed, sometimes bad things happen, and they want to blame us. Like for my case, this was a long time ago. My case was the patient had a subdural that came back, had seizures, was in the hospital for 4 months, got Dilantin, which caused Stevens-Johnson syndrome, which took her life 4 months later or 5 months later. And they came back and sued me and the attending because we didn't diagnose the subdural. What? That was the case, right? And it went all, like I said, all the way up to the Illinois Supreme Court. So, like, bad things happen sometimes, and why and we are expected to be divine when we're not, right? And that's the so I mean the cases are the cases that you see that have merit on the plaintiff side. Are they really egregious, or are they just the doc did his best or did her best and he had a bad outcome?
There are two very common scenarios. The first is, yes, completely egregious breach in the standard of care. I know it's difficult to believe, especially if you're a good clinician, but there's some really bad medicine that is still being practiced. A lot of physicians ignoring patient complaints that are documented multiple times by nurses, but the physician just sort of breezes over them. A lot of surgical complication cases where it's not the actual complication that happened during surgery that's the problem. It's the lack of recognition in the aftermath and doing anything about it. So a lot of blowing off patients, telling them to wait a few days and come into clinic, and everything that trickles down from there. So yes, there are some very egregious breaches in the standard of care. The other scenario that is extremely common and becoming more common are systems issues. Systems issues that set physicians up for failure. Some of those being the proliferation of the use of non-physician providers in the acute care setting. So physician assistants, nurse practitioners, which can be wonderful resources. However, not all are, just like physicians, not all are trained the same way. And they are given a lot of responsibility and asked to do a lot of things that they might not necessarily have the experience or training to do. And because physicians might have to have a panel of 30, 40 patients, however many patients you have a panel of, and it's their non-physician provider that is doing the bulk of the work and you're coming in on the back end, things tend to get missed. There's miscommunication issues. And unfortunately, physicians get tied up in those situations because ultimately they're the ones that are responsible. And so
Our practice uses quite a bit of advanced practice providers, and they're excellent. I mean, I think we're very careful about the ones that we choose, and we're always work collaboratively, and they're very good at what they do. And apparently that's not the same case across the board, is what you're saying.
Yeah, absolutely. Especially, and I won't call out any names, but I see a lot of for-profit hospital systems that really utilize advanced practice providers as their primary source of care. And I see a lot of repeat scenarios and systems issues. One of the issues, though, is it's very difficult, if not impossible, in most states to file a suit directly against the system without also having a provider linked to the care, whether
Now, I
that
was
be
going
the
to
advanced
ask,
practice provider or a physician.
like, why is that the physician's fault if the system is set up that way? Why is the physician looped into that? Why is the physician liable?
Because the healthcare system is not a practitioner and can't be liable for medical malpractice. Now they can be linked into the case. They are always listed as a defendant as well. And typically what happens is the physicians will eventually get dropped from the case and the healthcare system will settle for themselves, because then that will keep the physician off the National Practitioner Data Bank and
Mhm.
all the all the trickle down effects of having to apply for credentials at other places,
That
et
happened to
cetera.
me. Yeah, that
Yeah,
happens.
yeah.
The healthcare system always drops the docs and then just settles with the healthcare system. That's wonderful. I mean, that's really a great service.
Right, and that's what should happen. But yeah, it's hospitals are getting busier, and things are becoming more expensive, and healthcare systems are using advanced practice providers, some of which are great, some of which aren't. And then there's, I mean, there are lots of systems issues that come up. I mean, I'm working on a retained foreign body case in the OR right now. Like that's still happening, right? Like how does that happen in 2025 that you still leave an object inside, not a small object inside somebody, in a surgery,
Wow.
wrong site surgeries. I mean, these things are still happening, and so you have to think, if you were that family member or if you were that patient and you had long-term effects and you needed care for the rest of your life because of this, your insurance isn't paying for it. So um, it's a reasonable thing for them to pursue.
I mean, that makes sense. We always get, I get newsletters from expert witness companies, and then there's a really good Substack called Med Mal Reviewer. I don't know if you're
Yeah,
familiar
oh,
with
yeah.
it.
No, he's great. He's great.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, it's fantastic. And it's really eye-opening. I don't even know where he gets the documents from. Is that all from the case log that's public,
Yeah, it's all
or
public. Yeah, it's
it's
all
all
public.
public?
He's got other ways too, but yeah,
It's
he's
very,
he's a
I
bright guy.
recommend,
Yeah.
I'll put the link in the show notes. It's very eye-opening. I recommend everyone to subscribe. But it's frightening. These settlements that come through, like there's one in Chicago, in the Chicago area. I'm based in Chicago, the Chicago area, where the surgeon, it was like 20, it was just tens of millions of dollars that will wipe out a physician financially and wipe out, it's a generational wipeout of wealth. Those are so frightening, right? Like, and you can see yourself, you just make a mistake, something happens, it's not necessarily your fault, and then is it really just we don't follow up, we don't document, we don't communicate? Is it really, are there simple fixes?
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. The last two words that you said are the fixes, right? So, what do we have to go on when we're reviewing a case as an expert or as a consultant or as an attorney? You've got the medical record, and then you have what everybody says in depositions. That's it, right? So, documentation is everything. And it's actually easier now than back when you and I trained and through
Yeah,
most of our practice. Because when you and I trained and through most of our practice, all of our documentation had to be so thick and so verbose just for the sake of coding, right?
right.
Most of that is gone now, right? We don't have to document every lab in every note. We don't have to document a full physical exam in every note. What we need to document is our medical decision making, because that's where the where billing primarily comes from now, right? And medical decision making
Correct.
is everything. So when I'm reviewing a case and I see a physician that has a nice, paragraph, two paragraphs about why they did what they did, it's almost over for me, because you can't argue with the logic. You can't say that they didn't think about it or that they blew it off. Like, here was their logic. Were they right? No, but they used reasonable logic to do it. Game over. You're done. It's that simple. Um, and then communication, because most families and most patients go to an attorney typically because it's not because they want money, even though it feels like that. They're looking for answers. Something has happened. They've asked people. All those people have circled the wagons. Nobody's really saying anything. And they're looking for answers. And their only remedy is a lawsuit when they can't get the answers. So if you head that off from the very beginning, and as a critical care physician, I'm sure you do this every day, right? Set them up with reasonable expectations from the time they show up on your unit.
Mhm.
Be there when they need you. If they call and want to talk to the doc, you come and show up. You hold hands. You don't just pass off the end of life discussions to your palliative care consults. You're part of it, right? You're giving them all the options, and doing all of that up front, and becoming a letting the family and the patients become a member of the team almost always will prevent the suit at the end. They'll never even go to see somebody because they know what happened and they know why it happened and they know that you cared. Um, so many times when I'm reviewing cases, I'll talk to my attorney clients and they'll talk about how their family or how their clients, how the patient or the family said nobody ever talked to us. We called over and over again. Nobody would tell us what happened. Nobody would tell us why. And this was the only thing that we could do. So short answer, I talked too long, but short answer to
No,
your
I love it.
question,
I love it.
short answer to your question, document, not defensively. I hate that word. I hate defensive documentation. Absolutely hate that concept. You're not documenting defensively. You're documenting what you did and why. It's that simple. If someone reads it, say, what did he do and why did he do it? That's it. Super simple. And then communicate with your patients. Yes, you're busy. Yes, it takes extra time, but it takes a lot less time than 2 to 3 years of a lawsuit, lost sleep, and all the things that go with that.
So those, yeah, so those are good. Those are good kind of pointers that you see from your perspective as documentation. I remember for the first case I was in, like if the on-call cardiologist just wrote on a piece of paper, I told them at 7:30 go to the ER when she had her first seizure. They went 2 hours later. I think the lawsuit would have been done, but no one documented that they called them. She's having a headache. He said go to the ER. He never documented the time, and then they went a couple hours later when she was seizing again, and they found the subdural. And I remember another case I had with a patient who died. He had blastomycosis, died. I told him on Tuesday you need to go to the hospital. He said no. And I wrote everywhere in my record that he said no. And then on Friday, when I went to do the bronchoscopy, and he was so hypoxic, we had to admit him to the ICU. I told him on Tuesday, you have to go to the hospital. He
Yeah.
said no. Then in my consult, I said, I told him on Tuesday, you have to go to the hospital. You know what I mean? And right after he died, it was very sad. It was blastomycosis. Um, he took him forever to come to see me as a pulmonologist. And then right after he died, I got a letter from a lawyer. I want all your records. I'm like, all right, okay. And then nothing, silence. And I think it's because I wrote down,
Yeah, absolutely.
right? I wrote down, yeah, I told you on Tuesday you have to go to the hospital. He's like, no, I feel so much better with the oxygen. Just, I'll see you on Friday. And I was like,
Yeah, and
okay.
well, because he's telling his family members, no, doc says everything's fine. Doc says everything's fine, and then the family is like, the doc said everything was fine.
No,
But that's not
no,
what he's telling you.
no, the doc did not say everything is fine.
Right. Yeah.
And so those are very helpful points, and I do appreciate the perspective of coming from at it from the plaintiff, because we think we don't we like because it's just such a painful experience. You hate to do that to somebody, and at the same time, I guess you do want credibility. And if you can actually, I love what you're doing. Says if you can say there's no case here, then you're saving a colleague heartache, right? And you're saving that attorney a lot of case and a lot of resources that on a case that really won't go anywhere. So I guess you are doing a service to your colleagues if you do it that way. If you tell them
I
they're really
can't tell
this,
you how many times I've had clients come to me and say, Jeff, this one's a slam dunk. I just need to know what experts I need. And I start looking at the case and I say, well, look, tap the brakes, y'all, and show them all the reasons it's not a case. And nothing ever happens. And physicians have no idea how close they were to getting served and going through it. Like it happens probably once every other week.
wow,
That it's
that's
that
great. Thank you.
Yeah. Well, I mean it's nothing it's nothing remarkable. It's just attorneys aren't physicians, right? And so they're listening to what their clients are saying. But when you really dig into the records, you find out what really happened. And plaintiff attorneys, despite how it might feel as a physician, they're not terrible people. They're representing their clients, and they're representing these families, and they're representing the injured people, and they really feel like they're doing what they're supposed to be doing. Now, are there bad ones? Of course. I don't work with them. Like, I won't work with an attorney that says, Jeff, I need a doctor that'll say this. Yeah, I said, no, that's not for me, but I wish you the best of luck. But that's a rarity. It really is a rarity.
That's fantastic. That's a fantastic perspective. Dr. Jeff Willis, thank you so much for your time today. Documentation and communication, those things we know how to do. We just have to take the time to do it. And it will definitely pay off in the future. So thanks for your time. Thanks for your expertise. I'll put his website and expert retainer in the show notes, and the MedMal Reviewer link as well. Subscribe to the podcast, to the Substack. And thanks so much.
All right. Thanks a lot. Take care. Have a good day.
You too. Thank you for listening. Sign up at healthcaremusings.com to get every episode delivered directly to your email. And please don't forget to leave a 5-star review. Thank you so much.